na na nai 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 ya na nai na na nai 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 ya na nai na 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 nai 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 na na nai na 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 nai na nai na na nai 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 ya na nai na na nai 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 ya na nai na na nai 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 ya na nai hit it na nai hit it na 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 nai ya na 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 nai ha na na nai 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 na 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 nai ha na 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 nai ya na 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 nai ya na 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 nai ya na nai 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 oh ay 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 oh hit it na nai 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 oh hit it na nai 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 ya na nai na na nai nai Shalom, shalom, friends. It's wonderful to see you. And I am first so sorry that we started late. We always try to start on time. I'm very sorry about that. I'm secondly sorry that I am sitting outside the front door of the Valley Beit Midrash office because I'm locked out for another 5 minutes. So it's been an interesting day to start. Let's just say that. There is a lot happening. And so I am sorry for that. And so who knows, maybe I'll get an Amazon delivery while I'm sitting right here. But I'm sorry I hope the audio is okay. And good, thank you for the nods. And I'll have a transition when my heroic wife shows up with another set of keys in a few minutes. So friends, I'm so excited for our lessons in leadership today. And today is number 6, which is knowing when to step back. Some of y'all have already highlighted this issue and brought this up. And as I said, it was coming up this week. And this is such a complicated one psychologically for us at times, but so important. So let's start with a poll question. Let's start with a poll question here. I find it harder to step up and lead in challenging situations, or to step back for others to lead when I want to lead. Which of these resonates for you more? I find it harder to step up and lead in challenging situations, or I find it harder to step back for others to lead when I want to lead. 33% find it harder to step up and lead in challenging situations, and 67% find it harder to step back for others to lead when they want to lead. Okay, very interesting. So, friends, let's jump in together. When we've poured our heart and soul into building something, maybe the hardest thing to do is to let go. Looking to the Tanakh, I think of Yaakov on his deathbed, famously, the most famous deathbed scene. In fact, I can't believe, has there ever been a good movie made about Yaakov? I don't know of one. They really need another movie, The 10 Commandments. They tried doing Joseph again for kids, whether we think they did a good job or not, different conversation. But they really need a Yaakov deathbed scene as the most famous deathbed scene. In any case, I think of Yaakov on his deathbed, surrounded by his children, who would go on to, of course, establish our 12 tribes. And I think of Moshe, who, after leading his people out of bondage in Egypt and through the desert for 40 years, knows he will die before entering the promised land and needs to hand leadership off to Yehoshua. Very difficult for him to do. He wants to go into the land. He wants to continue to lead. Very difficult. I find it telling that Pirkei Avot begins with Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. We're going to come back to this idea. No matter how great a leader one is, their work is diminished if responsibility is not passed on. One of my favorite examples from Tanakh is that of Mordechai and Queen Esther. Mordechai challenges Esther about how important this moment is for her. That's the most famous part of the whole Megillah, of course. And once she accepts that this is her moment, Mordecai steps back. He doesn't talk with her anymore about it. He doesn't tell her how to deal with Haman. Boo. And Achashverosh, when to do this and when to do that. He empowers her, and then he steps back. In my own life, I think of Rabbi Avi Weiss, who, when he needed a successor at his synagogue, literally, gradually ceded the bima to his associate rabbi, who's my chavruta actually, slowly taking steps back so that the congregation could physically notice the transition was happening, but only very subtly. He did the same thing with the seminaries he founded, Yeshivat Chovevei Torah and Yeshivat Maharat, the first Orthodox institution to ordain women as rabbis. Here comes my great hero now. You're now going to have a great guest appearance in this class with the amazing Shoshana Yanklowitz. Shoshana Yanklowitz is now going to share her wisdom on stepping back. Shoshana Yanklowitz, what does it mean to step back? What does it mean to step back so other people can lead? How does that look like as a mother for your kids?
It means I step back and I let him.
No, it's opposite. We both step back together. Anyways, have a great day. Thank you for the keys so I can get in the office and take you. It's great. Okay, so this man here, Avi Weiss, physically, as I mentioned, when he introduced the new associate rabbi, and he physically stepped back from the stage so that everyone could kind of physically notice this transition. Thank you all for being so kind and flexible. So it's unfortunate to see instances where we see someone democratically elected officials who move their country into tyranny, refusing to let go of power. Many people think Trump's inability to accept his 2020 election loss and his unwillingness to stop the subsequent insurrection is an example of that, an inability to let go. In the Jewish tradition, the whole notion of rabbinical institutions is about teachers empowering students. A mentor might allow their student to continue to be reliant on them and offer specific guidance until the student gets the hang of things. Or the teacher might empower them to be their own thinker and find methods that might differ in some ways from the previous wisdom. Of course, there's some risk of handing things over too quickly and having insufficient continuity. But equally dangerous is failing to build a culture that enables people to dream of that possibility of leadership on their own. Perhaps we can look to the temple of God, God's self. In the Torah, God is highly interventional in the world, bringing us out of Egypt virtually by God's own hand. Then as we mature as a nation, setting up governments, courts, and armies, God plays a less active role. By the time the Jews get to the events of Purim and Hanukkah, the responsibility is almost entirely on us, right? Over there by leaving Egypt, God does it all. We just walk. Right? Over here by Hanukkah and Purim, it's all on us. As a maturation process of humanity, God steps back so humans step up. And when we get to the rabbinic period and can debate the Torah ourselves, we're told that God smiled and said, "My children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me." i.e., we don't look to God anymore for answers. The rabbis vote by majority, the Talmud says. And God laughs that we kind of overcame God, right? God is not our answer anymore as to how we come to moral conclusions, right? We have a new intellectual process of how we discuss ethics. Christians still talk about, some Christians, some kind of born-again Christians and evangelical Christians and the like, will talk about God speaking to them or God giving them signs or things like that. Jews don't really talk like that, right? God doesn't tell us what to do. We look to scripture, we debate, we argue, we think critically. I mean, there's some Jews that talk like that, and with all respect to them. It's the same for us as parents with our kids. We learn when to give them space to experiment and learn. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs put it best. Biblical faith demands courage. It is not for the faint-hearted. Its vision of the universe is anything but comfortable. The Hebrew Bible tells the long and often tense story of the childhood of humanity under the parenthood of God. But God does not want humankind to remain in childhood. He wants them to become adults, exercising responsibility and freedom. A weak parent seeks to control his children. A true parent seeks to relinquish control, which is why God never intervenes to protect us from ourselves. That means that we will stumble and fall, but only by so doing does a child learn to walk. God does not ask his children not to make mistakes. To the contrary, he accepts that in the Bible's own words, there is none on earth so righteous as to only do good and never sin. God asks us only to acknowledge our mistakes and learn from them. Forgiveness is written into the structure of the universe. By the way, this is another reason why we don't accept Virgin Mary, we don't accept Jesus. One of it is that we reject the infallibility of a human being, right? That even the greatest of Jewish leaders is completely fallible, right? When we learn the Torah, we don't say, oh, these are perfect people. We should be just like these perfect people. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, Moses, King David. The Tanakh is obsessed with how many mistakes they make, how morally flawed they are, right? We hold our heroes up as amazing people and as flawed people, right? We don't hold up people to say, oh, Virgin Mary and Jesus, these are perfect people, right? Again, with all respect to Christianity, I can see why that would be a compelling theology, that your heroes are perfect people. Our Jewish model is different, that parents are flawed, people of the Torah are flawed, right? I mean, geez, we even critique God, throughout the tradition. That's even seen as a higher level of faith, to be a critic rather than a blind acceptor, right? The Elie Wiesel putting God on trial, The new generation will mess up and learn from experience. It always has. The growth requires us to take the initial risk of letting go, even knowing the next generation is going to make a whole bunch of mistakes. The poet Cecil Day Lewis wrote, "Selfhood begins with a walking away, and love is proved in the letting go." Let me read that again. Selfhood begins with a walking away, and love is proved in the letting go, right? Anyone who's dropped off their child at college before, that is like a moment many people talk about, where the child becomes a little bit more of themselves in that drop-off, right? And the love becomes a little stronger in being able to let go a little bit of that child being dropped off. I mean, every time Shoshana drops off one of our kids at school, it's like a college drop-off. It's like it's part of being a survivor family. The survivor family is like, it's like every goodbye is like a last goodbye. So maybe you're from a survivor family and you can relate to that. If you're like me and you're not from a survivor family, then maybe it's a little different. Anyways, Sean is donating her kidney next Wednesday. She has a lot of those survivor feelings around goodbyes as it relates to major surgery. Okay, now I'm going to stop getting emotional. I'm going to try. Often many want our children to be just like us in many ways. Others abnegate their responsibility completely at trying to mold their children into people of character. We must find some kind of middle ground, of course, influencing and giving space. By the way, I continue to believe in many ways we influence our grandchildren much more than our children. A child wants to be different than their parent. A grandchild wants to return to be like their grandparent. Of course, there's many exceptions, but in many ways, that resonates with my experience. Rabbi David Hartman taught, the mother's and father's task is not to decide how the child will use his memories. Their obligation is to see to it that the child does not enter into the future without a past. Let me read that Hartman quote again because I think it's powerful. The mother's and father's task is not to decide how the child will use their memories. Their obligation is to see to it simply that the child does not enter the future without having a past. In some ways, Shabbat is a training for learning to step back and let go. As we go from building and creating and controlling to simply being. So too, stepping back in the beginning of the Amidah, of the Shemon Esrei, reminds us of stepping back from the world as we knew it in order to step back in differently. In discourse today, there's conversation about men stepping up and taking responsibility, but also stepping back for more women's voices. While the specifics of this can be debated, there's no doubt that this is a necessary idea, the idea of men learning how to step back for more women's leadership. There are those who applaud Joe Biden for stepping back from his presidential campaign when it was apparent that he was unlikely to win re-election, giving room for Kamala Harris to run for a more energetic race, although it's been reported heavily that he believed he still could win and still would win for various reasons. Even though Biden believed he was having a successful term and he felt he was capable of executing another one, the voters, by and large, and his party, by and large, lost confidence in him. So he made the choice to put his own ambitions aside for the betterment of the country. And if we're being honest, the betterment of his own legacy. He's got a win-win situation. If Kamala loses, most likely he would have lost, and he comes out a winner in that he stepped back for her. If Kamala wins, he comes out the winner who kind of helped to enable that to happen. So I don't think that was what was guiding his decision. By the way, he was working towards a hostage deal in the hour. It's been heavily reported, working towards a hostage deal in the hour building up to this. That's kind of what was on his mind. Anyways, still there are those who say he held on for too long still and did not step back soon enough, that his own ego got in the way of the previous months when he should have stepped back even sooner. Only time will tell how history will judge his decision, ultimately. And there are those who still believe he was a more winnable candidate than Kamala. Similar discussions are had about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Lahavdil, in a very different way, one might say, Benjamin Netanyahu. Perhaps one of these people to us is a hero and the other is not. Perhaps they're both heroes to us. Perhaps neither one is. In anyways case, if Justice Ginsburg had retired earlier, her work would not have been diminished by her being replaced with a Trump-appointed justice. And given the failures of catastrophes overseen by Netanyahu, many feel he holds Israel back by refusing to let Israeli politics move forward, not to mention a hostage deal. I'm sure we all have many views about both of these people. By the way, interesting fun fact, you may have recalled, she died the day, Erev Rosh Hashanah. She died Erev Rosh Hashanah, and many people were throwing around a Talmudic quote that said, the most righteous people die Erev Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because on Rosh Hashanah, it's decreed who will live and die in the coming year. And the idea is that she was decreed, again, in a traditional theology sense, it was decreed that she would die that year, but the most righteous person is given right until the end of that year, i.e. right before the next Rosh Hashanah. So maybe that's a meaningful idea. Maybe you don't believe in that theology. In any case, many people who liked Ruth Bader Ginsburg were sharing that idea, that Erev Rosh Hashanah. One other fun fact about her. I was at the White House for a Hanukkah party right when Nelson Mandela died. And when President Obama announced this, somebody in the crowd yelled, "Justice! Justice!" And we looked over, and it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg yelling. I don't know why she was yelling justice when Nelson Mandela died, but that was her reaction at the moment. So that was interesting. Nobody ever wrote about that. But anyways, when we're in a position of leadership, we should be looking for people we can challenge to create a vision that goes beyond the scope of our tenure so that they can take control and execute that vision when the time is right. Maimonides, in his Mishnah Torah, makes a point to remember all the links in the chain from Moshe to Joshua and into the rabbinic era. He recorded, now this is a little long-winded. I was debating whether to record this whole thing, but I think it's interesting. What this represents here is how important it was for the rabbis to constantly record continuity, the transition of leadership. Again, something Trump struggled with in America, something that Netanyahu struggles with, something that many people who have been CEO for 40 years or whatever the case is, something that many people struggle with. And the rabbinic tradition is obsessed with recording this. Now, many people find this to be the most boring part of Torah readings. But again, the importance of it is that it shows this die-hard commitment to transitions. Thus, there were 40 generations from Rav Ashi back to Moses. They want to show how every handoff takes place. Nobody's like, nope, I won't make a handoff. And they were Rav Ashi from Rava, Rava from Rabba, Rabba from Rav Huna, Rav Huna from Rabbi Yochanan and Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan and Rav and Shmuel from Rabbeinu HaKodesh, Rabbeinu HaKodesh from Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon from Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel from Rabbi Shimon, Shimon from Gamliel, Gamliel from Shimon, Shimon from Shammai, Hillel and Shammai from Shemaiah and Avtalion, Shemaiah and Avtalion from Yehuda and Shimon, Yehuda and Shimon from Yehoshua ben Brachia and Nitai of Arbel. They're both in Pirkei Avot. Yehoshua and Nitai from Yoezer, Yossi ben Yoezer and Yosef ben Yochanan. Yossi ben Yoezer from Antagonus. Antagonus from Shimon the righteous. Shimon from Ezra. Ezra from Baruch. Baruch from Yirmiyahu. We all have a cousin Baruch, right? The guy here is your cousin Baruch. Baruch from Jeremiah. Jeremiah from Sphania. Sphania from Habakkuk. Now we're dealing with prophets. From the rabbis to the prophets, Habakkuk from Nahum, Nahum from Yoel, Yoel from Micha, Micha from Yeshayahu, Isaiah from Amos, Amos from Hosea, Hosea from Zechariah, Zechariah from Yehoiada, Yehoiada from Elisha, Elisha from Eliyahu, a Navi, Eliyahu from Achia, Achia from David, David from Shmuel, Shmuel from Eli, Eli from Pinchas, Pinchas from Joshua, Joshua from Moshe, Moshe from God, so to speak. And one of the things we like to say is, that Judaism is more about memory than history. Right? History is a modern idea. Historians study history. Memory is what your grandparent told you, right? Now, some people say, oh, is the grandparent's story true? And my answer is a little bit, who cares, right? I mean, when I put on my history hat, I care. I want true history, not fake history, right? But when I want Jewish memory, I want the smell of it. I want the feel of what your grandparent told you. You know what I mean? There's a truth to that beyond what the footnote of historians have to say. And that's what Jewish memory is, back for, thousands of years, is a handoff of people telling their child, their grandchild, or Sunday school, or whatever it is, stories that represent a truth. When people ask me, do you think the flood happened? Do you think there was a Garden of Eden? I say, I don't care, right? I really don't care. Like, these are moral, spiritual stories, right? They weren't meant to be scientific stories or historical stories, right? It gets more touchy when people ask about the Exodus, because that people get fiery about like the historicity of the Exodus. In any case, what's going on here? Why does Rambam take all this time to want to talk about this? Why do we care? Well, if we want to make the case for credibility of our tradition in the present, we want to root it in the past. We care about the wisdom of Rav Ashi because it's the wisdom passed on by Hillel and Shammai, by Isaiah and Elijah. The wisdom was passed from Joshua, from Moshe from God. Everyone in that chain of descent had to pass their wisdom on and step back, including God stepping back. And it's no different for us. If we want our legacy to live on and leave a lasting impact. This is a good point where I will make the reminder of the Life and Legacy Fund of VBM. If you want to become a member of the Life and Legacy Fund, that one of our legacies is our children, our grandchildren, and the like. And another type of legacy is our moral legacy, which includes our teachings to the world, our work, our careers. And the other type is our financial legacy of how we ensure that certain things that matter to us in the world continue beyond our life. When we step back we don't have to neglect the one we're stepping back for. There are two separate theologies of Simsum, God withdrawing from the world to make space for human freedom. This is an idea important to me, so I'm going to go slow here. Two different theologies of Simsum. One is that God steps back, but that the other is that God fills God's self into a finite space known as the sanctuary. God both creates space for others, but also knows to intensify presence as well. Now, let me move from theology now to our realm. Some think that they have to be all in or all out. I'm either in control or I leave, right? Dominating or totally not present. But what we learn from this theology is a different perspective. We can be very present and involved while also stepping back and creating a lot of space. It's not the model of, hey, you live in my house as you're a senior in high school. Now you go to college and you're out of my house, right? And it's that's a really radical break. There's something else that is a gradual process of baby steps where we are empowering others while also remaining present. One of the best ways to remember that we are not our social role, but a full person, is to work to remember who we are and what we care about. Rav Kook taught that Adam wasn't able to answer the question, where are you? Right? Adam from the Garden of Eden was asked, where are you? And he couldn't really answer this because he was alienated from his most true and deep self. Adam lost touch with his true I-ness, his true self. Only when we find our inner self and our unique purpose can we be less afraid to let go of the social roles that we believe define us, and without which we'd be empty of identity and meaning. Mary Wambach, anyone heard of her? Mary Wambach, a retired soccer player, a coach and member of the National Soccer Hall of Fame, wrote, "If you're not a leader on the bench, don't call yourself a leader on the field." An idea that I think is really great and that I'm going to use with my 6-year-old T-ball players when they start their game next week. And hopefully I'll be less intense than I was with my 4-year-old soccer girl players 6 months ago. These wonderful 4 and 5-year-old girl soccer players showed up. And, they thought it was just going to be all fun and games. And I had them marching around the field. And no, I very much took the Ted Lasso approach with them, that the number 3 goal is to win. The number 2 goal is to have fun. But the number 1 goal is to become a better person and through the game. And so that was my priority with them. There was this one little girl named Cohen, and she would call me teacher. I'd say, you could call me coach. But 2 minutes later, she'd say, teacher, teacher. And she would always kick the ball in the wrong goal. She was just awesome. She still is awesome. But in any case, I might use this with them, that if you're not a leader on the bench, don't call yourself a leader on the field. Sometimes we think we can only lead when we're in the center of the action. But leadership on the periphery is also a decentralized model. It's also really important, I think. You're either a leader everywhere or nowhere, she concludes. We don't just lead at the center, we also lead when we step back to the sidelines and we're cheering for others. Cheering for others is a form of exercising leadership. To conclude here, friends, a great example of the power of stepping back can be learned from gardening and the power of a seed. Any gardeners here? Eileen is right. This is like your moment. This is your moment. Just kidding. Every day is your moment. One Jewish writer offers, the seed is a model of transformation. There is no little broccoli plant in a broccoli seed. There is no little oak tree in an acorn. The seed is an amazing example of the potential hidden within even the tiniest of things. Seeds, as small as they are, contain the possibility of enormous transforming growth. For the biblical authors, seeds were fascinating because they embodied the prophetic energy of transformation. So friends, next time you're at a bar bat mitzvah, include with your $180 check or whatever you give, or your card, or your book, include a packet of seeds with the message of Rabbi Nachum Wordlev. May we all be gardeners planting seeds, nurturing their growth, but also patiently stepping back, enabling the great potential within all people to sprout. Lastly, I quote the Midrash that says, behind every little plant emerging from the soil is an angel whispering, grow. I love that image of the Midrash, that every plant has its own angel whispering, grow. Okay, friends, I'm very sorry for the hiccup in the beginning of the session, that my early meeting ran late. And then because of that, my keys got messed up. And I take full responsibility for that hiccup and for the fact that our conversation is shorter than usual. So I ask for your forgiveness. And I open up the conversation with you now. Gardener Eileen?
Hi. You said something which really struck a chord, and that is leading with my grandkids. And so far, my relationship with my grands has absolutely been one of the most rewarding relationships. And one of the things I am doing with them, because they are privileged, their parents are very well educated and have good jobs, they live in a nice home. And I started a charitable trust for charity that is the kids' trust. And every quarter, they decide where they're going to donate money. And then this year, I also added the provision that for their birthday, they get to choose something that they really want to contribute to.
Thank you, Eileen. Very cool model and very cool example of a way to engage grandkids around philanthropy. There's a strange mindset. I know many of my colleagues of similar age think, I'm going to become wealthy and become a philanthropist in my 70s. I said, well, you're going to wait to engage in philanthropy? Like, whatever you have, you can be a philanthropist. And a 12-year-old can be a philanthropist, a young philanthropist. It means a love for people. Anthro is, like anthropology means people, and phil is love, just like philosophy is a love of ideas. It's a love of people, and there's many ways to show love of people, including, charitably. So anyways, Eileen, very cool model. Thank you for sharing that with us. Who else wants to hop in? Hi, Judy.
There are two different approaches to having trouble with transitions. If you have a current leader who feels that he or she is the source of all wisdom and things that are good, and they cling to the leadership because they think they can do it better, and the other, they don't do it very well, and they somehow think that stepping aside would mean that they've been a failure. And there's a lot of jealousy involved with a young up and coming leader. You see that in Putin, for example. He's not going to be able to let go until he's dead in some way, because he jealously guards the power, and the power is what motivates him and what protects him, and enables him to be a source of grift and graft. But he's not a good example of a leader. He's an example of weakness in leadership that manifests itself in tyranny.
Well said, Judy. Thank you for that. I think that those are really good examples of some of the psychological pulls we have towards the challenge of stepping back. And I think we can normalize the idea that we all have negative emotions. I mean, we have many positive emotions with aging, and we can have some negative ones as well. And that's okay and normal. A father in his 70s recently told me that he loves his son, but he's jealous of his son because he feels like his son is now at the center of kind of the family unit like he used to be. And he feels like he's now on the periphery of the family unit in many ways. Now that might resonate for you, might not resonate at all, but like there's nothing wrong with a feeling like that. Or feeling jealous of a younger colleague who's now going to take the reins as somebody steps back, right? The question is like, do we process that in a healthy way where we can, enable a healthy culture around that, or do we bring some toxic energy to that family or to that workplace around that? So, Judy, do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, there's also the problem of a leader who is tired of leading and flees before the other one is ready to step up.
Right.
So
That's another great example. Yeah.
Premature Sim.
Yes. Well, a good example of that would be like the Jewish communal school that my kids go to. No, example of the opposite. A woman who was the head of school for like 20, 30 years, retired. She wanted to retire. And then they brought in someone else. And that person, for various reasons, left kind of abruptly. They got another opportunity. And they didn't have the time to find someone else. And he came out of retirement, which was not really her ideal, and because the school needed someone for a year or two so someone else could come back. So again, not everyone has to do that, but it's a good example where like, sometimes that you're like the system needs you to not transition out, needs you to kind of be in, or not leave abruptly. I can think of many examples, where someone left and they held on to too much institutional memory, and the system couldn't handle their departure.
Good morning, everyone. I'm painting the house, so I'm in my painting attire this morning. I want to go back to your poll question for a moment. So, we talked about people that can step up to leadership when needed, and then the other question was how stepping down, why letting others, or not stepping down when others want to volunteer for whatever reason. And I see in this next upcoming generation, I actually saw my generation too. There's a lot of people that say, I'm really involved in synagogues, or I'm involved in this organization or that organization. Look, I pay my dues, but are unwilling to step up in a leadership role, not necessarily being president, but stepping up in a committee to work with various things, and then becoming involved so much that they themselves enter in a leadership role that just benefits them on a personal level or their family. And I just see what has happened in the general Phoenix area with Jewish day schools. They open, they close, they open, they close as people step up for a personal value. Now that their kids are gone, they're out of there. But I think the younger generation definitely has an issue with, for the most part, stepping up and becoming leaders because of the society between raising kids and sports and family issues. So just kind of
I happen to very much agree with you that I have concerns about this younger generation for various reasons. Part of it is, as some of you may remember, the Vietnam War was a changing moment in the U.S. in how people related to patriotism, and how people related to national service, and how people related to kind of pride of American identity. Not everybody, of course, but certain segments of American population. And I think that was the start of a trend. And correct me if you either remember it or think of it differently. That was the start of a trend around national service that changed. Feeling like a part of a collective. Now, that's also true in some ways among not only among white folks, but in the Black community. Things like kneeling during, which I'm neither praising nor condemning at the moment, kneeling during a national anthem, something you wouldn't have seen 20 years ago. There is a new relationship, a new agitation with kind of reverence for patriotism or reverence for kind of national identity, or like for various reasons. That there's that. Then there's the downslide of just kind of a not just a notion of collective, but a commitment to service, national service being something, to be proud of. If you look at AmeriCorps and Peace Corps, and you look at serving in the Army and other forms of national service, I would love to have a required mandatory year of service in the country. But then you look down not just a national identity, but the breakdown of community, which is very well documented. The breakdown of in-person community, not just religious community, but beyond. And of course, part of the blame is social media community, and how inadequate that is. That's only part of it. Part of the blame is COVID, but that's only part of it. But then the breakdown of friendship, which has also been very well documented. How many less friends people have, especially younger people, especially men, older men than older women, and younger men than younger women. So it's national, it's service oriented, it's community, it's friendship, and then we look at the Jewish community, and I'm very concerned about it. Now, okay, I could put on my optimism hat for a moment and say, okay, every generation is worried about the next. Everything will be all right. And young Jews are going to figure out a way to do it their own way and do it differently. Like, we don't need to tell them how to do it. They're going to figure it out. I'm going to say all those things that are the right things to say if I'm doing the optimism moment. But I also am concerned. I'm concerned. And that's why we have leadership development programs to try to engage the next generation around stepping up and what it means to say, like, look, don't just expect the Jewish community to be there as it existed. Like, part of why it exists is because people step up. You're not entitled to it. Here's another example: birthright. No one could have imagined 40 years ago the idea, oh, here's your free trip to Israel. Here's your free trip. Like, the whole notion, young Jews think this, that my Jewish experience should be free, right? There's a sense that, like, the Jewish community is going to fund all my Jewish enrichment, right? And the birthright was part of that model. I'm going to go on this experience, and the community is going to pay for it. Now, Birthright has done wonderful things in terms of engagement. And I've got critiques as well of the program, but one of them is this issue right here. So, anyways, Gary, you want to add anything to that point?
Yeah. No, I just the point I was just trying to make, and I agree with you, is this lack of philanthropy that we see in a younger generation, but lack of leadership, of stepping up when called upon, or seen an issue and you feel deeply about it and step up and do something about it.
Yeah. One last thing, and then I'll open up to others again, which is that many Jews who were born in, let's say, the 50s or earlier, point to 1967 as a game-changing moment. Almost nobody wear a kippah in public, even like the most Orthodox of Jews, prior to 1967. And I shouldn't say almost nobody, very few people. 67 was well documented, a game-changing moment for a pride that we're going to make it. And so many people felt in their relationship to Israel who really lived through a 1967 moment. Like, I lived through a moment where I thought this whole thing would crumble, in a way that younger Jews also can't relate to. And I wonder if this current moment is going to escalate to a point where young Jews are going to have a 1967 moment, even more than an October 7th moment, where, geez, like, are the Jews going to make it through this? So anyways, yes. So who else wants to hop in here? Joseph or Steve or Sarah or Jeff or Matthew or Isaac or Alex? We haven't heard from you yet. If you want to take the first step. Hi, Steve.
Rabbi.
Yeah, Steve and then Matthew. Great.
Oh, thank you, Matthew. A little bit different road that I'm going to travel down here. First, this has been one of the most precious, delightful meetings I've had, not just since I've known Valley Beit Midrash, but since I've been in Phoenix and Scottsdale. And I can't quite put my finger on it, other than to say, when listening to everybody, I feel like we are friends. This is awesome. People are not afraid to say what they believe and are actually saying some really delightful and profound things. Anyway, moving on from my nostalgia. You used the phrase "the smell of history" before, and history can have a really powerful influence. But smell to me is one of the most evocative, provocative senses in the world. And when I smell, not too often anymore, mothballs or chicken soup, I immediately go back to the 1940s when I was a kid and grandparents and parents and how wonderful our family was. And it just brings me so much joy. Smell is super, super powerful. And I'm glad you brought it up, although in a different sense. Number two, and this is a personal battle I'm having because I'm losing my leadership. I am now my children's child, or I'm moving in that direction, I think. I can't say I dislike it. It's kind of nice where they make decisions, but I implicitly feel like I should be there at the helm saying, no, we do this, do that, do this, do that. But now it's sort of a silent transition between I am now no longer the leader. I can only imagine what a professional actor, actress, painter, football player, even a gardener, Eileen, feels when they can no longer do what they did before. And you know what? It's okay. People don't really come down on you for not being able to do that. In fact, they relish the possibility of taking care of you after having been taken care of for so long. But that's just my sentimental thank you for today. It's just been awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. That's really it's really profound, and that reflection there around that changing relationship with kids and the difficulty and delights of that is really meaningful to hear. And I have my own personal reflections on that, but I'll hold back on that. But the one takeaway we should all get from Steve's comments today is that we should all go out today and buy some mothballs and fill our house with mothballs, because that's what if you have kids or grandkids deserve from you, to have the memory of your. Judy says, no way. I'm just kidding. But my in-laws have a mothball smelling house in New Jersey. And on the one hand, I used to dread it walking in. There's no moths in the house. Why are there mothballs? And yet my kids, they walk in and that's what it smells like. So anyways, Judy says, no way. But for the rest of you, either bake an apple pie every time somebody comes to your house or buy some mothballs. Yeah. Judy says more for the apple pie. All right. So, hi, Sarah.
Good afternoon. So when I hear, I'm struck by two things. One, probably more than that. I also struggle with what I'm seeing. I'm imagining as post-COVID lack of initiative or persistence in younger people in their efforts or actions, that somehow it should all be done remotely and I don't really have to participate. And I'm struggling with that a lot when I look at a lot of the not-for-profit and for-profit organizations that I'm involved with. And it makes me deeply sad. On the other hand, the other piece of it that I'm hearing that I'm struggling with is the notion of leadership as an individual, as opposed to the cooperative model. And the notion that indeed we are stronger as a people rather than as an individual who makes the decisions. And I guess I'd like to explore that a lot more, because indeed we see even in Torah of like, hey, we can trust other people and we can delegate, and together we are stronger than an individual who is wasted by having to make all of the decisions alone. And I'm not talking about a board of directors, who generally is a bunch of rubber stampers for whoever's at the top of the heap. And I'm talking about genuine cooperative model and what that means for true learning of leadership and becoming part of a bigger organization and bigger thought, for that matter. I'm complete.
Awesome, Sarah. Thank you for that. I think that's a great point and a direction we're moving in. So we're going to come back to exactly your point. Thank you all so much. Wishing everyone a delightful day and many blessings to you all.